Doctor Who is coming very, very soon. What or who is Doctor Who? It's this awesome British sci-fi series that's been around forever, like since 1963, and yes, that's even before I was born. Seasons 1963 to 1989 are the classic Doctor Who's. It took a break in 89, but came back in 2005, which is the reboot that most people know. There was this weird attempt in the 90s to make it big in the US, but that was a total flop. I got into Doctor Who during the fourth Doctor's era and watched it religiously until it ended in 1989, but I've seen some of the earlier Doctor episodes too. Then, when it was rebooted in 2005, I was hooked until maybe the 12th Doctor, when I kind of lost interest. But guess what? David Tennant is making a comeback as the 14th Doctor, passing the torch to Ncuti Gatwa, who'll be the 15th Doctor. So I am pumped. I was a bit worried when I heard Disney was involved, remembering the US disaster the last time, but then I found out it's a partnership with the BBC, and Russell T Davies is back as the showrunner, so that's a relief. And I thought Ncuti Gatwa in Netflix's Sex Education was awesome. Also, one of my all-time favorite drag queens, Jinx Monsoon, is joining the cast. So now I'm super excited for the new Doctor Who, because I am Daisy X Machina, the drag queen detective who investigates all things speculative in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. So I wanted to join the hype for the new Doctor, and I figured let's do a tier ranking of the first 13 Doctors. I'm skipping the Doctors who are plot devices, so I'm not doing the War Doctor or the Fugitive Doctor or the Evil Doctor. Did you know there's an Evil Doctor? Yeah, during the 6th Doctor season in The Trial of a Time Lord, in that story arc, there was this Time Lord named the Valeyard. Basically, the Valeyard Doctor was a mix of all the Doctor's negative traits, and he ended up being this sort of living embodiment of the Doctor's guilt trip. Anyway, let's start tier ranking the main 13 Doctors. This should be fun. The first Doctor was played by William Hartnell, and he helmed the TARDIS for 3 seasons from 1963 to 1966. The grandfather of the Doctors, literally. His first companion was his granddaughter Susan. Later Doctors rarely brought up Susan, probably because they didn't want to deal with the idea that the Doctor had children. If you're interested in the genesis of the Doctor, the first 2 episodes are a must-see, just to see how Doctor Who was kicked off.
Hey, Doctor Who? What are you talking about?
They explain why the TARDIS looks like a police box wherever it goes, instead of camouflaging itself like it's supposed to.
It's still a police box. Why hasn't it changed?
The very interesting thing about the first Doctor in those initial episodes is he's a bit of an asshole. Like, seriously. He's cranky, cowardly, and whiny. Not quite the wise old grandfather he would eventually evolve into. The second story arc, The Daleks, is really interesting. And I heard on Twitter they're going to colorize it, which is amazing. And you know it must be true because it was on Twitter. Anyway, this storyline is the first time we ever see the Daleks. And we get their history, and we actually get a peek under the Daleks' hood and see the organic part. In some of the later Dalek storylines, you sometimes can forget that they're not just robots, but living creatures under a robot shell. Okay, so let's rate William Hartnell. He's not my favorite Doctor to watch, but I mean, mad respect that he's the OG. So I'm going to put him under solid. The second Doctor was played by Patrick Troughton for another 3 seasons from 67 to 69. And I've got to admit, I've caught fewer episodes of the second Doctor than even the first Doctor, and I didn't see much of the first Doctor, but Troughton introduced the archetype of the clown to the Doctor. He had this Three Stooges haircut, a massive fur coat, and even got the nickname of the Cosmic Hobo because he presented this vagabond look. He's silly, and sometimes silly really can work for a Doctor. And I like it when we get a quirky Doctor. Again, I haven't seen a ton of the Troughton episodes, but out of respect for giving us the clown archetype that later Doctors would also utilize, I'm going to say he's also solid. And I think I'm going to put him above Hartnell. The third Doctor was portrayed by John Pertwee for 5 seasons from 1970 to 74, and I've caught a bunch of his episodes in reruns, and I think he's great. He's got this wild mane of silver white hair, and I've dubbed him the swashbuckler Doctor. Nobody else has pulled off the role quite like him. He was sort of the opposite of the second Doctor, sort of the anti-clown Doctor. What sets him apart? Well, he's the most physical of all the Doctors. He uses some outer space martial arts called Venusian Aikido, swings a sword around, and he's not afraid to get in your face. The opening seasons have kind of an interesting setup. He got grounded on Earth as a punishment by the other Time Lords, so a bunch of his adventures are set on Earth. He cruises around in this old jalopy called Bessie and teams up with UNIT, the military branch of the United Nations run by Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, who I'm sure most Whovians know. And since the Doctor is often known by his companions, this time we got some very strong female companions like Liz Shaw, a scientist, and fan favorite Sarah Jane Smith, a journalist. Oh, and guess what? This is where we first meet the Doctor's greatest nemesis, the Master. One of my top story arcs is The Daemons, with a character named Miss Hawthorne, a white witch who's immune to the Master's mind control. It's fantastic stuff. If you can tell, I'm a big fan of the third Doctor, and we're going to put him on Fantastic. He's really good. You got to check him out. All right, so let's talk about my all-time favorite, the fourth Doctor, played by Tom Baker, holding the role for a whopping 7 seasons from 1974 to 1981. That's longer than any other Doctor, and trust me, that's for a very good reason. Tom Baker nailed what I think are all the essential qualities of the Doctor. He's a bit of a clown, a dash of the scientist, and a sprinkling of the philosopher. You could totally buy into him being this ancient star traveler who's seen it all, not taking life too seriously. There's also something innocent about him, but he's always guided by a moral compass. Now, what makes the fourth Doctor extra cool are his companions, hands down. They're the yin to his yang. Take Tila, for example, a straight-up barbarian warrior, always ready to kill anyone standing in her way, as opposed to the Doctor, who's, of course, more pacifist, or at least this version of the Doctor. And one of my absolute favorites, Romana. She's another Time Lord, maybe the only companion who was the Doctor's equal in every way. And yes, even more so than River Song. The first incarnation of Romana was played by Mary Tam, who was the Time Lord who was all book learning and no experience, as opposed to the Doctor who was all experience, and we find out maybe didn't do too well in Time Lord school. Even when Romana regenerated, she was still awesome, this time played by Lalla Ward, though she kind of turned into a mini Doctor. Quick side note, Tom Baker, the actor, married and then split with Lalla Ward. I don't know if that affected his performance, but you could sense he seemed a little tired of being the Doctor in his last season. Still, the floppy hat and ridiculous scarves are the iconic Doctor Who symbols. And jelly babies, anyone? So you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to rank Tom Baker as iconic. When Tom Baker regenerated, I was seriously bummed. But of course, I was curious about the next Doctor, the fifth Doctor, played by Peter Davison, who hung on to the role for 3 seasons, from 1982 to 1984. When I first saw his picture, I thought he was way too young. I like my Doctors a little bit more mature. And he is arguably the most attractive Doctor, at least attractive in the conventional sense. Me, I kind of like my Doctors to look a little goofy. At least give him a costume with more character, though the fifth Doctor did always have this stick of celery on his lapel because it had healing qualities or something. I don't really remember. But the most damning thing for me was the writing. It felt like the writing was weak. And even putting that aside, the fifth Doctor just felt a little bit bland to me. There was no clown or funny aspect. He certainly wasn't a swashbuckler. Davison just seemed to play the role straight. That Whovian spark, it was kind of missing. So I'm going to put Davison as weak. All right. Brace yourself for the sixth Doctor, played by Colin Baker, who had a blink-and-you-miss-it run from 1985 to 1986. At the time, I actually was convinced he was Tom Baker's younger brother. They both had that curly hair. But it turns out I was wrong. My bad. Now, this has to be one of the biggest duds in Doctor Who history, and it wasn't all Colin Baker's fault. The writers swung for the fences and wildly missed when they thought, hey, wouldn't it be fun if the Doctor went insane during this regeneration? Spoiler, it wasn't fun. The Doctor turned into this angry, unpleasant, loud character, like an angry child more than a Doctor Who. Personally, I really, really did not vibe with this interpretation. So I am putting Colin Baker as meh. Oh, to add insult to injury, during Colin Baker's run, they ditched the iconic police box, the TARDIS. Yeah, the classic blue box, gone. Instead, the TARDIS had this partially fixed chameleon circuit, making it morph into weird objects that didn't quite fit into the surroundings. The Doctor couldn't regenerate soon enough, if you ask me. So, let's move on to the seventh Doctor, played by Sylvester McCoy, who navigated the TARDIS from 1987 to 1989. After that, the series hit the pause button, went on a break, or whatever you want to call it, for 15 years. And I couldn't wrap my head around why the Doctor was essentially canceled because, from what I could tell, Sylvester McCoy was a decent Doctor. He brought back the clown archetype, and especially after the last 2 Doctors, it felt like the Doctor was back where he belonged. Okay, I got to throw it out there. McCoy did inherit one of the worst companions ever, Mel. She was basically a screaming damsel in distress in every episode, which was a far cry from the powerhouse female companions like a scientist or a journalist or a warrior or a lady Time Lord. But then we got Ace. Now, she's one of the great companions. She's the total opposite of the Doctor. Again, I think companions really work when they are a sharp contrast to the Doctor. She's an explosives expert who likes blowing things up, while the Doctor's a pacifist. It gave me serious Tila vibes. And the writing, really good stuff. Plus, we got another Time Lord villain, the Ronnie, who I always wished would make a comeback in the reboot, but I guess she can't since only the Doctor and the Master are the only Time Lords left. Anyway, I was left scratching my head wondering why Doctor Who got canceled, because it felt to me like the show was finally back on track. I'm going to put McCoy as fantastic. Now, this ends the classic Doctor Who run. If you have only seen the reboot of Doctor Who, that's Doctors 9 through 13, and you watch some of these classic Doctor Whos, you have to be warned, the classic Doctors had zero budget. zero, nada, zilch. I mean, we're talking sets that were high school production quality costumes straight out of Holly Hobby and special effects that were, well, let's just say beyond amateur. And don't think, oh, it was back in the day, all FX was primitive, because even for the time, the FX was bad. If you're used to the slick productions, killer soundtracks, and it's kind of amazing what a difference a soundtrack can make, and top-line special effects, the classic Doctor Who's may throw you for a loop. But here's the thing, they did not skimp on the stories. Seriously. Some of the best sci-fi writing for TV is tucked away in many of these classic episodes. Fun fact, Douglas Adams, yes, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams was one of the writers. And the performances, usually they were very good as well. But why should you watch the classic? The stories and performances are gold. All right. Buckle up, because I guess we have to touch on the so-called Eighth Doctor. And honestly, I wouldn't mind if we just wiped him from our collective consciousness, but we got to talk about him because he's become canon. Rewind to 1996. The year Doctor Who got handed over to an American production, which in hindsight should have been a red flag. Back then, every Doctor Who fan was stoked. I was stoked. The actor Paul McGann looked pretty cool in all the previews, and for the first time, it was a big budget production. It was the talk of the town for us Who fans, but then it aired. Okay. Sylvester McCoy passing the baton at the start was pretty cool, but as the story unfolded, it became clear the American production had two goals for the program in mind. Number one, make the Doctor sexy. Number two, make him relatable. Sexy time Doctor meant turning the Doctor into some type of sex symbol with sparks flying with his companion. Yuck. Just a big fat no. And for making him relatable, the charm of the previous Doctors was that he was a wise old alien traveler to time and space. He wasn't designed to be relatable, but to be mysterious and kooky and charming. Well, the American production decided to fix that by making him half human. It was a slap in the face felt around the world by every Doctor Who fan out there. Unsurprisingly, the pilot movie bombed big time, so they never shot the series. And let's all collectively agree to never bring up the Eighth Doctor again. Yes, I think he is absolutely May behind Colin Baker. So after the whole American fiasco, the BBC finally got the rights back to Doctor Who, but it took them until 2005 to reboot the series, and that's probably the version most of you know. In 2005, we started the reboot with the ninth Doctor, played by Christopher Eccleston, who only stuck around for one season. And he was kind of like Peter Davison, good-looking but bland. What really saved the series were two things. First, the writing. The writing was killer, had some really great storylines. Second, Rose, the Doctor's companion, played by Billie Piper. Personally, I think she carried the first season like a boss. Personality, family, love her mom. She was just a blast to watch. Now, I briefly want to talk about the decision in the reboot that's never sat well with me, the Time War. They wiped out all the Time Lords except for the Doctor and, of course, the Master. In the classic Doctors, we would get glimpses of the larger society of Time Lords, which made us know more about the Doctor from seeing the other Time Lords and how Gallifrey operated. We saw Time Lord companions, Gallifreyan politics, Time Lord villains, and even some enlightened Time Lords who maybe were even wiser or greater than the Doctor. Without Gallifrey, it felt like the Doctor turned into this almost mythical, tragic demigod who really could never be brought down to reality. The last of his race is just not my favorite trope. What do you think? Do you think the Time Lords vanishing in some Time War paradox was a good idea, or do you wish they were still kicking around? Let me know down in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Anyway, back to the Ninth Doctor. His one season was pretty good, but it felt like it happened almost despite him rather than because of him. But because the season was good, I'm going to say he's solid. I'm going to put him behind the Second Doctor. Now, let's talk about the 10th Doctor, and come on, we all know it's David Tennant, right? His time in the TARDIS ran for 3 seasons, from 2006 to 2008, and everything was firing on all cylinders. The companions were on point. He inherited Rose, who we know was great. Then we got Martha, and I always liked Martha. But then finally, the legendary Donna, one of my all-time favorite companions. The writing was top-notch, chef's kiss, and David Tennant, he brought it. He had that spark that makes you go, hey, he might actually be an alien, but an alien I feel safe around and want to know better. And sometimes you got glimpses that something was a little bit off about him, but that just made you love him more. Oh, and we can't forget Captain Jack and Torchwood. Torchwood spun off into its own series, which I thought was pretty good. Who doesn't love the immortal Jack Harkness? So, if you started watching The Doctor during the reboot, there's a pretty good chance that the 10th Doctor is your favorite, and there's a good reason why. So that's why I'm going to bring him up next to Tom Baker as an icon. Tom Baker's still first, but David Tennant is up there. All right, so after David Tennant's home run, the next Doctor had some big shoes to fill. Enter the 11th Doctor, who ran from 2010 to 2013, played by Matt Smith. Now, I'll be honest, he took a bit of time to grow on me. Another young Doctor, and you know I like my Doctors a bit more mature, but he had this goofy face. Sometimes I would think, okay, he's kind of good looking. And at other times I'd be like, man, this guy is pretty funny looking. And it depended on the lighting and the camera angle, which is pretty weird. But he embraced the clown archetype, which was cool. But it took me a whole season to really warm up to him. In the end, I think he did a good job. Oh, and we got River Song, always this enigma. Was she married to the Doctor? Was she a Time Lord? Who the heck was she? We found out during the Doctor's run. And even though I prefer my Doctor to be a bit more asexual, the River Song Doctor relationship felt like it was based on attraction of personality, not any sort of sexual attraction, if you know what I mean. But we did get a lot of romance in the subplot with his companions, Amy Pond and Rory. Well, a lot of romance in Doctor Who terms. Surprisingly, I was cool with it. So I'm going to put Matt Smith up there as fantastic, behind Sylvester McCoy. All right, let's dive into the 12th Doctor era, running from 2014 to 2017, played by Peter Capaldi. I was really pumped when I saw we were getting a mature Doctor. That got me really excited. But, and it's a big but, he brought a whole lot of anger to the TARDIS. And I'm just not a fan of seeing an angry Doctor. It gave me major Colin Baker, Sixth Doctor vibes. He was just so darn unlikable. The only standout for me was Missy, the female regeneration of the Master. And I got to say, I love that actress, Michelle Gomez. In my book, she can do no wrong, no matter what role she's in. But other than that, it was tough for me to find this Doctor enjoyable. A bit of a letdown, to be honest. So I am going to put him as weak behind Peter Davison. Now we get to the 13th Doctor, our first female Doctor, played by Jodie Whittaker, holding the role from 2018 to 2021. And I know there was some controversy that a doctor regenerated as a woman. Cue clutching the pearls. Personally, I thought it was about time for a female doctor, especially since I had thought that Donna Noble would be stepping into the role after David Tennant. I really thought they were setting us up for Catherine Tate to play the doctor, and I was ready for it, but alas, it didn't happen. So, how did our first female doctor do? Well, I never connected with her. And I've got to put a lot of the blame on the writing. I felt it was a bit weak. And honestly, I haven't caught many of her episodes. So maybe my mind could change if I saw more episodes, because I hear some people did like her, but I just couldn't get into it. The one thing about her performance, I felt like I could see the actor trying a bit too hard to be quirky instead of fully embracing the quirkiness of the doctor. If you're going for a quirky clown archetype doctor, maybe hire a comic actor like a Patrick Troughton, Tom Baker, Sylvester McCoy, maybe even a Matt Smith, maybe a Catherine Tate. Now, you might totally disagree with me, and that's cool, but the 13th Doctor did not quite hit the mark for me. So I'm putting her as weak behind... I'll put her in front of Capaldi. All right, that wraps up my ranking of the first 13 Doctors. I admit my enthusiasm for Doctor Who has been waning after the last couple of Doctors, but the buzz for the upcoming season is getting me excited again. David Tennant swooping back as the 14th Doctor, which is amazing. He's passing the torch to Ncuti Gatwa, who's gearing up to be the 15th Doctor and the first Doctor of Color. Again, I'm really hyped to see what Ncuti will bring to the table, especially after being blown away by his portrayal of the flamboyant gay student in Sex Education on Netflix. I thought he brought a lot of layers to the role, and here's hoping they won't be afraid to give us a few more off-the-beaten-track companions that aren't designed to be relatable, like a robot dog, or a warrior woman, or an assassin, or another Time Lord. Although, let's face it, the ship has probably sailed for any hope of another Time Lord. Anyway, fingers crossed for some surprises. Let me know what you think down in the comments. And until we meet again, may all your TARDISes be blessed.